Eloise Theisen is up. She is going to talk to us about cannabinoids in symptom management. She is a nurse practitioner, and she is the founder of Radical Health Clinical Network. So Eloise, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. Feels like a really small, intimate group, and it was a treat to read the stories from families. I got a little emotional. It's nice to see the community that comes together for each other and support each other. And I'm delighted to be here. And I'm also a little wondering how you all are feeling about this topic. So what qualifies me to be here? Come on, Bill. Well, I have been working in the cannabis space now for about 10 years. I have my own clinic where I have helped a couple of family members. I've also been a nurse for 22 years, a nurse practitioner for the last 8. I'm now at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, where I work in the palliative care department, and I get to help patients every day who want to use cannabis for symptom management. So I want to talk a little bit today about some of the research and the ways that people are using cannabis and whether or not it might be a good fit. I've now worked with about 8,500 patients. Most of my patients are older, about 76. They're predominantly female. They're looking to use it for pain or sleep. Most of them don't want to smoke it and they don't want to get high. And I'm here to tell you that it's quite possible to not do that. So this is just a partial list of conditions in which cannabinoids have been thought to be effective and help treat. And this is a list that should garner some skepticism, right? How is it that one plant can be so effective for so many different conditions? And the reason is the endocannabinoid system. And I promise I won't get into too much biology or chemistry, but this is actually a system that's responsible for homeostasis. So it restores us back to balance. So things like our appetite, our mood, our pain perception, and our memory are all regulated by this system. It wasn't discovered until the early 1990s. So from a scientific community perspective, we don't know a lot about it. We do know that it's found in all vertebrae and in some invertebrate animals. We also know that if our endocannabinoid system is not functioning, we can see something called endocannabinoid deficiency. And we can see these in other disease states like Parkinson's disease, where we have a deficit of dopamine. We might see it in diabetes, where we have a deficit of insulin. And this is one of the top physicians. He's a pediatric neurologist. He's been researching cannabinoids and cannabis for decades. And he has a theory around the clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, and that things like migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel may be related to a dysfunctional endocannabinoid system, and that's why they're treatment resistant. And if we use cannabinoids, we may be able to restore our body back to function. Now, I will tell you, there are other ways to get your endocannabinoid system back into function or homeostasis, and that's through things like diet and exercise, but cannabinoids are quite popular right now. I live here in California, so I have access to quite a few products, probably too many products, and be quite overwhelming for the new user or consumer. I want to talk a little bit about the different components found in the plant. I'm going to talk about how you can consume them, and I'll talk about the different conditions in which people might want to consider it. Really, to understand how to get the right product for you, you have to understand these different profiles, and it's very complex. If you live in a state where you have adult use or medical use and you've walked into a dispensary where they sell the marijuana, it can be very confusing and overwhelming. They often have names that make no sense and often will not give you any idea about how it's going to make you feel, like Obama OG. So it's useless. But THC is one of the most common cannabinoids in the plants, also the most feared cannabinoid. It does attach to that endocannabinoid system. And when it does, it produces the effects of pleasure, euphoria. A lot of people are euphorophobic, right? I don't want to feel high. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like when it comes to dosing THC. But if we can control the dose, we can often control side effects. And here's a list of conditions in which THC is thought to be effective. And most people, when they think of THC, they think about it using it for appetite or possibly nausea, but we're seeing quite a bit of evidence for things like pain and anxiety and inflammation. And this is a list of side effects that can happen. And these side effects are dose dependent. So the more that you consume, the more likely you are to have these side effects. You get towards the bottom, you see things like hallucinations, paranoia, amnesia. This all happens in larger dosages. So those side effects can be avoided if you work with somebody who's knowledgeable enough to make sure that you don't overconsume. But some of these side effects are intentional. So hyperphagia means increased appetite. Sometimes I want that effect. Fatigue, sometimes I'm trying to help people sleep. And believe it or not, sometimes I'm trying to help people forget a little bit. With my cancer patients in particular, they have a lot of anxiety around their diagnosis, around having to get more scans. And sometimes when they use THC in particular, they kind of forget what they're thinking about, right? THCA is a lesser known component of the plant. This is the raw form of THC. And I like to refer to this as, make the analogy of our foods. Our raw foods are really high in nutrients. And when we cook them, we lose those nutrients. And sometimes we tend to overcook them. But the raw form of THC is called THCA. And this is actually a way to consume cannabis without experiencing that quote unquote high. It is thought to be more water soluble, so our bodies absorb it better, so people can use lower dosages. So you can get the benefits of THC without the euphoric effects. We don't have as much research on THCA. It's very unstable. We've seen it help with things like nausea and pain, muscle spasms, and inflammation. But I want to focus a little bit more on CBD because even in states where you don't have legal adult or medical use, CBD is everywhere. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why and some of the risks of purchasing CBD online. CBD is getting a lot of attention. We know that it can help with anxiety. We're seeing a lot of help with depression. Also, it can be a mood altering substance. So it doesn't create euphoria. It has a list of conditions that's a little bit wider and broader than THC. And a lot of these studies have been done in animals, so we're not really sure what exactly CBD does for bone infections, bone fractures or bacterial infections, but there's definitely promise there. There's also some side effects that come with it, which is again, dose dependent. The more you consume, the more likely you can have side effects. And all of these components are what we call biphasic. So that means a low dose may produce one effect and a large dose may produce the opposite. So for example, if you're using THC for nausea and you take too much, you can actually vomit. And we have a raw form of CBD called CBDA. And these products are available online under the hemp product lines. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second here. Again, it's water soluble. Your body absorbs it better. You can take lower dosages. It's cheaper, less likely to have side effects. And here's just a partial list of conditions. Again, not well studied yet. THC is the most studied, the most common, the most sought after. But CBD can be alerting and stimulating in some people. So can CBDA at lower dosages. So I might use it for things like fatigue, ADHD, or what some people refer to as brain fog. One of the misconceptions about CBD is that it's not psychoactive. It is indeed a mood altering substance, but it's not euphoric. It's not going to make you feel quote unquote high. So there's a lot of CBD out there because in 2018, the Farm Bill was passed, which legalized hemp. And so now you're seeing a lot of these products come from hemp, but historically we've used hemp for things like textiles and concrete and rope. We have to be really careful about which products we choose because not all products are created equal. The hemp plant can actually flower like the marijuana plant, and that's where you want to get your medicine. When the Farm Bill was passed, it descheduled hemp, but the DEA and the FDA came out and said, yes, fine, but CBD is still a Schedule I drug. So I can't prescribe it as a clinician. It's not covered by insurance. And it's very confusing out there. You can buy it, but it's still considered illegal. So there are some states like Idaho where CBD is still banned. The challenge, of course, is that these products are not regulated. So it's hard to know whether or not they're safe or if there are other contaminants in these products. They did, this is a nonprofit organization that did some research to take a look at these products. They purchased a bunch online and had them tested independently. and found almost, what was it, 50%? 43% were under-labeled, meaning they had less CBD in the product than was on the label. And in fact, some had 0. And 26 had more than was on the label. So again, an unregulated market and a lot of buyer beware. The FDA has also come out and said, you can't make any special claims about cannabis, particularly CBD, as curative for anything, which was interesting. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, there were quite a few CBD companies selling you your COVID cure kit with CBD in it, and the FDA came in quickly and shut them down. So hemp-derived products, this is actually a field of the hemp that we use for things like rope and textile. You can see it's a really, do I get a little pointer on here? Yeah, you can see right here, it's a really long, tall stalk and stem, right? And there's just these leaves up there. This is actually a hemp plant as well. And for those of you who may be sophisticated, might say, look, looks like a marijuana plant. But what's happening now is growers have figured out how to lower the THC amount so that it qualifies as a hemp product. And that THC has to be 0.3% or less. So these are flowering plants right here. This is really where you want to make sure your medicine is coming from. The stalk and stem back in here hardly has any CBD in it. So if you're going to purchase a product online, look for one that says it's flower derived. It's also important that they're lab testing. They do something called a certificate of analysis, where you can look and see the potency of it. Was it used? Were there any harmful chemicals used in the process of it? And you want to make sure you know what you're getting. Don't buy it from a grocery store, please. I also tend to be a little bit of a purist, so I don't like products that have any additives in it. You know, sometimes those additives can be triggering for some patients, so I like mine to be as clean as possible. So no fructose syrup, added chemicals like that. I also want to make sure they're not making any health claims. I don't want to support companies that are trying to sell a bag of goods to people. There are also companies out there that do multi-level marketing, which means they want you to buy a bunch of it. Remember Amway? Maybe some of you remember Amway. And you sell it to your friends, cousins, friends, best friends, boyfriend, sister. And people end up with so much product that they can't sell that they can spend thousands of dollars. So there are 3 types of CBD products on the market right now that are often marketed to consumers, and they're called either full spectrum, broad spectrum, or an isolate. And the full spectrum is probably where the research shows the most effective. It means there's some THC in there, and that THC is going to interact with those receptors in our endocannabinoid system, and you're likely to get a more fuller effect, reduction in symptoms. You're less likely to build a tolerance to the products. Sometimes though, what happens is the THC in here can be high enough where people can feel impaired, because now they're making CBD products that are as much as 100 milligrams per unit or dose. And sometimes you can get as much as 5 milligrams of THC, which in an inexperienced user can trigger some impairment. So you'll see broad spectrum, which means they've removed the THC, or they call it THC free. Sometimes there's THC in there, but often not enough to elicit any sort of impairing effect. And then you get a CBD isolate, where they've completely removed everything but the CBD. It's single molecule. It's very similar to a pharmaceutical style product. Okay, so how do people consume it? Well, believe it or not, there's a lot of different routes of administration. And again, here in California, I'm pretty fortunate to be able to have a bunch of different routes. Smoking is still the most popular way, believe it or not. And it's often really counterintuitive for people when I say you might want to consider inhalation. And I'm going to talk, sometimes the benefits will outweigh the risk. Inhalation works instantly. People feel the effects. It's easy to control. It's predictable. They know what they got. This is, for any of you who may not know, a pre-rolled joint. And this is the flower bud. And this is what people will actually inhale. This is the plant in its most natural state. It hasn't been disrupted, so there are more nuanced therapeutic effects. Smoking can be really hard on people's lungs, and their throat can make them cough. You're burning the product at about 1200 plus degrees. So you're definitely going to produce carcinogens and tars when you light it. So then the industry came out and said, well, why don't we do vaporization? Because we did that with nicotine, right? So, you know, they promote it as the safer way to consume cannabis. And what you're seeing here is this is a cartridge of oil that they've removed from the plant. And this is your battery right here. This is your button that you hold down, and that heats up the oil in here. And that's where you put the mouth and you draw in. They've done studies on these, and there's a lot of controversy on them. First of all, right here, you see this is metal. They find that after the oil sits in these metal cartridges for months, it starts to leach heavy metals. So you can have some products that may not be safe. The other thing is these devices are all made overseas, and they're not regulated for their temperature control. They're likely burning as hot as if you were smoking. So you could be producing carcinogens and tars. And we know that heavy long-term use of cannabis can lead to airway inflammation and chronic bronchitis. So it is not the preferred route for most people, but there are times when the benefit may outweigh the risk. The most popular method, though, are the oils or tinctures. And the reason for that is they're very easy to control the dose and start very low and slow. Most of these are oil-based. They're often just the cannabinoids and maybe MCT or coconut oil or olive oil. So they can be pretty additive free. They are marketed often, though, to go under the tongue. And I'll tell you that they don't work as quickly as the manufacturer might say. So they can take sometimes upwards of an hour to take effect, but may last for 5 or 6. So this is great for real chronic issues that we're trying to treat, like sleep, anxiety, or pain, for example. Here in California, tinctures are becoming extinct in our cannabis medical adult market. And the reason for that is because what sells the most is high THC. And anybody else want to guess what the second thing that people love? You're probably hearing all over the place. Gummies. Gummies. I mean, they make everything out of gummies now, right? Apple cider vinegar, melatonin. So edibles. Edibles are quite popular. Edibles can be really unpredictable, though. You know, unfortunately, if you consume an edible and you have a bad experience, it's a story that you'll tell. But when you're experiencing it, people end up sometimes in the emergency department because they feel like they're going to die. Their heart rate goes up. They can get paranoid. They can feel disassociated. So the challenge, of course, with edibles is figuring out how much you need. We always say start low and slow. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. The other thing is it really depends on your metabolism. What did you eat that day? Your gender, your weight, all of that can influence how these impact you. So I don't like to start with them, but they are economic. Once you figure out your dose, they can be a little bit more affordable. Topicals are good for any sort of topical issue like itching, rashes, maybe some muscular pain. These work in about 15 minutes and can last for a couple hours. They're discreet, easy to use, and often have no side effects because they don't get into the bloodstream. But my favorite is the transdermal patches. And the transdermal patches are actually designed to enter the bloodstream. They are recommended to go where there's a thin layer of skin and penetrate the blood supply. And they work for anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. So it's great if we have issues with compliance. Because they work quickly in about 30 minutes, if somebody is having a side effect they don't like, they can remove the patch and those side effects will go away. They're expensive. Of course, there's a lot that goes into manufacturing these. So they can range here in California about $14 a patch. And that patch is probably a 4-day use patch. And I just wanted to mention suppositories because, again, if you go on Dr. Google, it will tell you that suppositories are a great way to consume cannabis, believe it or not. I wanted to be inclusive so you know what's out there. But these are poorly absorbed, and I can't imagine most people wanting to do something so invasive to use their cannabis. But people don't feel any psychoactive effects because it doesn't go through the liver. So for some people, it really helps their pain without the quote unquote high. Okay, so why are people using it? Well, sleep is probably one of the top reasons people come to cannabis. And we actually have pretty good data on it. We have the National Academy of Sciences that came out in 2017, and they reviewed 10,000 peer-reviewed cannabis studies. And then they made their recommendations. And they found that there was moderate evidence to support the use of cannabis for short-term sleep issues. So that, we haven't really studied long-term effects on sleep. And that's the same thing with some of our pharmaceuticals. But we do know chronic pain, fibromyalgia, obstructive sleep apnea, multiple sclerosis, those conditions benefit from cannabinoids for sleep. And as I mentioned earlier, low doses of cannabinoids can have one effect and a larger dose can have the other. So low doses of CBD can be stimulating, particularly I see in female. And when it is stimulating and they take it before bed, it keeps them up all night. So larger doses of CBD may be more effective for sleep, although I will tell you in my practice, we're talking hundreds of milligrams of CBD, which can become quite cost prohibitive for some people. Low doses of THC tend to be pretty effective for sleep. And depending on whether you have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, sort of depends on which way you want to consider, which route you want to consider. Most products of CBD are marketed to help with sleep, but again, you usually need larger dosages, and they may put additives in there like melatonin or valerian root. So just make sure you read the ingredients. Chronic pain, I want to talk about too. The National Academy of Sciences said that there was conclusive evidence that cannabinoids are effective for chronic pain. It can reduce the dysphoria associated with pain, so that bad mood that people can get in. It can help boost opioid analgesic effects, so it can make those medications work better, and it can help with inflammation. And again, we know that CBD can actually reduce some of the unwanted effects of THC. It can act like a dimmer switch. So if you took THC alone but added some CBD, you might actually find it is more pleasant and controls your pain better. They've looked at using just CBD for pain, and it doesn't help as much. You really do need THC. And often I tell people CBD is sort of like Tylenol. It might help with a mild headache, but if you have significant pain, you're likely going to need some THC. This was a study that was done, a small study of just under 30 patients, and half of them got CBD topical, the other half did not. But they really found that it helped with nerve type of pain, what we call neuropathic pain, the pins, the needles. Sometimes people have itching or cold sensations that worsen that pins and needle feeling. And they did get good benefit from it. And remember, topicals typically don't have any side effects, so very well tolerated and effective. So it might protect some of these nerves from damage, CBD in particular. It might help relieve the pain related to inflammation and that neuropathic pain. THC can also produce analgesic effects. It can modulate some of our neurotransmitters that are related to the transmission of pain, such as our own endogenous opioids, the ones we make within our own body. And this was a study that was done in 2017 because neuropathic pain is one of those pain conditions that we don't have a lot of tools in our toolbox. But you can see here, I'll just summarize for you. They basically came out and said, okay, well, the pharmaceutical medications that we have for this condition are pretty ineffective. And, we can try them. They'll probably have a lot of side effects and they may not work. There have been studies that have been done predominantly in other countries, the United Kingdom, Israel, Australia, looking at using cannabinoids for neuropathic pain. This is actually a picture of a plant-derived medication called Sativex. It's a CBD THC spray that goes in the mouth that is manufactured in the United Kingdom. It's not available in the United States. It's approved in 33 other countries, though. So go figure. But what was interesting when they did this study was that they found that it was effective for the pain, but the ranges in which their dosages was between 2.5 milligrams of THC and CBD up to 30 milligrams of THC and CBD. So it's a very individualized experience. And this is why I think people can get really frustrated with cannabis and give up way before they get any results, because you have to self-titrate and sort of self-explore. We know that cannabis isn't toxic like opioids that we use a lot for pain. It can exacerbate things like constipation and maybe sedation, but there's no risk of overdose or death with cannabis. So it does have a better safety profile than a lot of the medications that we prescribe. Anxiety and depression, and I also want to talk a little bit about epilepsy as well. We are seeing better research come out looking at the use of cannabis for anxiety and depression. And I want to talk about the differences between THC and CBD for these conditions, because one of them can make them worse. We did a study, there was a study done in 2018 looking at the endocannabinoid system and found that, again, that dysfunction could be contributing to chronic depression in some individuals. They also looked at a study of people who are self-consuming, self-regulating, self-medicating. Most of them were using THC for their depressive episodes. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the concerns around that. This was a study looking at CBD for anxiety. Again, the purpose of me showing this slide in particular is if you look here, the dosages were between 15 milligrams and 600 milligrams. So wide dosing range there for people to use CBD for anxiety. But they did find it was effective for many types of anxiety, social anxiety, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic, and even, again, that THC-induced anxiety for people who overconsume. This was a study looking at using CBD for sleep and anxiety, and what they found was the lower dosages, around 25 milligrams of CBD, was most effective for anxiety, where the larger dosages, about 175 milligrams, was what was most effective for sleep. So again, big dosing ranges depending on what you're trying to achieve. But there's definitely things about THC that we should be concerned about. And there's enough data out there right now to say that sometimes THC in particular can worsen some mental health challenges or illnesses. And we need to be careful about those who have a history of mental health in their family or even personally, who may be prone to paranoia or hallucinations. We've seen in particular that THC can worsen these symptoms. And what we see is happening in these situations is that the use keeps going up. So a lot of times I work with adolescents where the parents are asking me to meet with them because they've caught their kid using marijuana. And when I interview the kid, it's usually because they can't sleep, they're not eating, and they're feeling anxious, which for me is partially like adolescence in a nutshell, right? So they gravitate towards cannabis because their friends are using it and they find it helps. They continue to use it. Their dose goes up because they build a tolerance to the benefits of it. And then what happens is they start to get anxiety as a result of it. So they end up using more and more, and they make that anxiety worse. And so in these situations, what we're finding is that we actually have to have them abstain from the THC and use other methods to help them control their anxiety. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about seizures in cannabis. And this is definitely not my area of expertise, but I did want to provide a little bit here because I know some of the AHC kids can have seizure and epilepsy disorders. This is Charlotte Figge. If any of you are familiar with her, she had Dravet syndrome, and her family started to give her CBD particularly and found that she went from hundreds of seizures a day down to just one or two. She actually passed away, I think, in 2022, but had great quality of life improvement with the use of CBD. And they actually started a company called Charlotte's Web, which sells CBD online. They are a good, reputable brand. And then as a result, in 2018, we saw Epidiolex. This is actually a CBD FDA-approved medication that is for certain epilepsy seizure disorders. The dosages range from 5 milligrams to 20 milligrams per kilogram. And seizures reduced by 55% at higher dosages. So the more they took, the less likely or the less seizures they had. This is incredibly expensive, but I think sometimes $3,000 a month, even though it's pharmaceutical and FDA approved. So this was a study that came out looking at a trial of 162 patients at 11 epilepsy centers in the United States. They didn't have any control groups, but the ages ranged from 1 to 30 years and demonstrated a 36.5% reduction in seizure over 12 weeks when they used CBD. And this was a trial of 74 children. Again, no control group. This was in Israel. They did a CBD, a little bit of THC in there. They found 18% of children had a 75 to 100% reduction in seizure recurrences. 34% had a 50 to 75% reduction in seizure occurrences, and 12% had a 25 to 50 reduction in seizure occurrences, but 26% had less than 25% reduction, and 7 stopped due to an increased seizure activity. But again, the National Academy of Sciences came out with their review of the literature and said that there was a lack of double-blind studies, meaning they didn't have any control groups, randomized controlled studies. Those are considered our gold standards in the scientific community. So the National Academy of Sciences said that there's not sufficient evidence to support or refute the use of cannabis. So they're like Switzerland, right? They're not taking a stand on it until more research comes out. Now, if you ask parents or if you go online, you'll see that many people would say, yes, CBD works for seizures. It's the only thing that's helped my kid. So we do see in some treatment resistant cases that CBD can be quite effective. But most of these products are artisanal. So there can be a lot of variation in terms of consistency. You know, when we get our pharmaceuticals, we rely sort of on that standardization, that consistency. You can have variation from each batch that is made by up to 20%. So sometimes you'll get a product that works really well. You get a new batch. For some reason, it doesn't work. It's likely because there's a variation in the potency. That can be really frustrating. And while there are very few drug-to-drug interactions where we get concerned enough to stop the cannabis treatment, you may see some increases in benefits of other medications. So sometimes it's boosting the effects of those medications. Sometimes we can reduce other medications like sleep medications, for example. But it's always good to have somebody review if you're going to consider, because CBD is the most likely cannabinoid to interfere with other medications. And with that, I think I have time for questions before I catch my flight. So questions from anybody or comments? I didn't bring any free samples. I'm sorry. Yes. I can hear and then I'll repeat it. Oh.
So we're lucky enough to live in the state of Colorado. So we have access to a lot of really good resources, and we can grow it, produce it, and give it to our child. So that's what we've chosen. So because we're literally growing it to making it ourselves and giving it to our child, it's really the things that you mentioned that were kind of adverse or less for us. Is that accurate? The labeling, the not knowing what you have, the having a bad batch, the mold, all of that.
I would say one of the benefits of being in a state where you are allowed to grow your own, and you know, once you learn how to do it, absolutely, you can control for any sort of, you know, molds, inconsistencies. You can grow the same variety each time. I think that is, I applaud you for taking that on. I think it's a huge undertaking. I tried to grow myself just to see how, you know, is it easy? Is it hard? I couldn't do it. So I know that there's a lot of stress and challenges that can go into it. But once you get it dialed in, it's beautiful. It's cheaper. It's much easier to manage. So yes, less to worry about. Okay. You're going to get your steps in.
Is CBD safe for infants? So I have a 7-month-old like for instance, topical creams or even oils, how do you know that? And how do you know that if your doctor doesn't know either?
That's such a great question. There is a pediatrician, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who does work with children, and she's a cannabis clinician, Bonni Goldstein. I would definitely, I'm older adults. She has been helping kids with, epilepsy to cancer. I know she's had one AHC kid because I checked in with her before I came here to see if she had any, pearls of wisdom. I think topicals are safe. The thing about topicals is they're not going to get into the bloodstream. The concern around giving oils always is risk versus benefit, and what other medications are you on, and what does the evidence say? And so I think talking to a knowledgeable cannabis clinician would be really valuable before you start anything. Yeah. I say the same thing about pregnancy too.
I'm curious, you didn't mention any experience with it in managing dystonia episodes as an alternative to like Valium as a rescue med.
Valium makes you cranky AF. Is that when it wears off? Because I would think when it hits, you'd be like, hey. I looked, there's not a lot of research on dystonia, which is why I didn't present it. If I can't find research to support why people are using it, I don't want to offer it. I think there are probably lots of anecdotal reports out there that it can help. Absolutely. Yeah. But good question.
Thanks, Eloise. That was a really great talk. One question that I have, so when you mentioned the Epidiolex, I know it's obviously only indicated for a very just particular types of epilepsy. So what's been your experience with trying it for those who have seizures, not that particular type, for physicians, in terms of their openness for prescribing it, as well as payers for even covering it? And then if that's not a covered source, and what is more, for an adult, what's the best way then what's the best route of administration, the edibles or the oils, specifically for seizures? Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, I think you're bringing up, there has been good outcomes for people with seizures not related to the 3 that the FDA has indicated. It is trial. I don't like to say trial and error. It's definitely a lot of experimentation because we don't have good data on dosing. How much should I take? How often should I take it? How long do I need to be on this? We do know that there's some data with Epidiolex that 5 milligrams to 20 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Now for me, I think I'm down to 75 kilos. So you're talking, at 5, you're talking thousands of milligrams a day. That becomes very cost prohibitive if it's not covered by insurance. So if Epidiolex is not covered under your insurance, that cost can be like $3,000 a month. If you're going to do artesian, on the CBD hemp side, you could be spending hundreds of dollars a month for it. If you don't have an open-minded physician, or a lot of times it's just that they don't know anything, right? So they'll say, that's fine if you want to do it. I just don't know anything about it. There's Society of Cannabis Clinicians is a nonprofit organization that lists clinicians all over the United States, in fact, the world, that will work with people to help them figure out how often to use it. Should you reduce the other seizure medications? I think something serious. I mean, all of these conditions I consider serious, but having that guided help will make all the difference in the outcome. So you're not wasting money and time, and you're getting on track sooner. And a lot of times now, I mean, when I first started doing this in 2013, the physicians were actually more, what's the word I want to use? Threatening. To me, at least, no, you can't, don't you dare help my patient with marijuana kind of thing. And now you've seen this sort of shift in perspective because so many patients and families are saying, but it works. It's the only thing that works. And so now they're like, okay, go ahead, but I I can't help you. So we still need some help with education. Yeah. All the way back there. You ready for it?
If you can't get Epidiolex, what are some tips for not picking a product that might be contaminated with heavy metals or something in manufacturing?
So Epidiolex is an isolate. It's refined down to 99.9% CBD. So if you're going to use a CBD product on the market, you can look for reputable brands for a certificate of analysis. So they're going to have test results. Those test results should be specific to the batch that you're buying. It should tell you how much CBD and THC is in there. And they should be testing for molds, pesticides, fungus, heavy metals. Not all of these companies do that. There were companies out there that would do sort of this review of products so that you could see who to trust. Some of them are no longer out there, but I work with a media company called Healthline, and they do reviews of products, and I medically, bless the product. So there's a stringent vetting process there. They make money. I mean, that's how they make their money. So there's a conflict of interest there. But I do think it's a good place to start because at least you can see those products are clean. The challenge, of course, is we don't have standards in the testing, criteria. So it's always, there are good brands out there. I don't have an affiliation with any of them, but Miriam's Hope is a good brand. That's MYRIAMS. Charlotte's Web is a good brand. Healer CBD is a good brand. That's Physician. That's a Physician brand. So there's some good ones out there. Any other questions you guys are going to make? Josh, do any more running? Yeah.
So those brands that, by the way, I do epilepsy. So the first people who kind of look in those, they found response in patients with focal seizures, generalized seizures. There's a lot of response. Those three syndromes, just a little bit easier to test, a little more responsive. So it's a little financial, I guess, or efficacy driven. That's where they come. If you want to get the original cohort, the people from NYU, from Dr. Oren Davinsky, have a nice paper that they use in a bunch of things. They are not as common, but for example, Dr. Davinsky is part of the duplication of chromosome 15 alliance, and they've been using that too. So there are other patients with that. But my question has nothing to do with that, is because it is very hard to get them to pay if they don't have Lennox-Gastaut, if they don't have Dravet syndrome and tuberous sclerosis. Is this Miriam Hope and Healers, they are like CBD products, high CBD products? Okay. Cool. Thank you.
A lot of these companies have compassion programs. Another one is Lazarus Naturals. They'll give 60% off to those who can show a financial hardship. So it's, a lot of these companies that are doing it right do try to. Lazarus Naturals, yeah, they do 60% off. Miriam's Hope will do, I think, 40 to 50% off for those with serious chronic conditions. Yeah. Here, let me give you the microphone so you can tell them.
So when they did the study at the Massachusetts General with Dr. Elizabeth Thiel, one of the things that they saw right away is that some of the patients who were on clobazam 2 became sleepy. We were like, well, what happened with the patients who were just taking CBD, didn't have that much sleepiness? And then they found that clobazam is transformed into norclobazam as a metabolite, and that guy goes up pretty dramatically after a week or two on CBD. And there are more side effects if you take CBD and valproic acid. So it's a couple good caveats for people with epilepsy.
That's a really good point. Some of the drug interactions have been noted mostly in anti-epileptic medications. Yeah. Yeah, one more question.
So I know you kind of mentioned at the beginning that there's probably at this point thousands, if not tens of thousands of different strains out there. Do you have any resources for someone who is looking to try and target these conditions for which terpenes, which CBD products, which strains would be better than one or the other to start with? If there's any resources, or if there's any research that's being done in that kind of category there.
You must be the grower in the family. Full disclosure, not my wheelhouse. There's actually a researcher physician out of Israel who is doing that for cancer. And he's, genetically mapping all the different, there's so much in the plant that we haven't discovered. And he's looking at the different terpenes and the cannabinoid profile to see if it's more effective in certain cancers. So I don't know. I know that I would try to find like a growers society, maybe in Colorado, to see if that would be helpful for you. Because it gets so big and so overwhelming so quickly. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time and attention.